Good morning. As I said, I wear a lot of hats, and most of these hats will actually weave themselves into this talk and hopefully to a coherent narrative. I'm Vice President of Security Research and Intelligence at a small security company called ThreatStop. I am working on my PhD in machine learning, or informatics specifically, but machine learning at the University of Illinois, as well as lecturing and teaching, which I've done for the last 7 years, and I produce open source threat feeds. So I have an agenda of things that are covered to hopefully go from the abstract to hopefully some general and specific takeaways that I think will hopefully be useful for you as we talk about ethics, technology, and data, and some aspects of security of data that we are creating through web apps and mobile apps and some of the technologies that we may all be involved in, of which the implications of that data creation I don't think are entirely well understood or well thought through, and how we secure it is also important. But to start is, I often, get asked, and I'm sure by others, right? Why haven't you fixed security yet? Why is hacking still a thing? OWASP has been around for, 15 years, 10 years? Right? And SQL injections still happen, right? Why haven't these problems been fixed? And a lot of these problems have real implications, not just in terms of data theft, but in real world physical risks. A different part of my research involves surveillance malware used by the Chinese government on ethnic minorities in Tibet and all the various groups inside PRC that you can name that are targeted by the Chinese government who are using mobile phones and vulnerabilities in mobile phones to track and ultimately put people in concentration camps. We haven't really fixed those problems in terms to how to figure out how to use technology securely. But as a way to kind of hopefully wake you up a little bit, what is the earliest documented case that anybody in this room can think of a social engineering attack?
Adam and Eve.
Yes. Genesis chapter 3, right? And no matter what you happen to believe about that book, right? Not to make a religious point, but that pen was put to paper for that book 3,400 years ago. And they were talking about social engineering back then. The point is, all of this stuff has been around, in essence, as part of the human culture since the beginning, right? After Adam and Eve, what did the next generation did? Cain and Abel, right? We went to straight fratricide, right, in generation 2. All of these problems that we face in cybersecurity are really human problems that we're trying to use technology to solve. Why do people commit crime? The only thing that technology has allowed them to do, criminals, is to commit crime on an unprecedented scale and over larger distances. People have been doing credit card and check fraud ever since there were credit cards and checks. Until the internet, you just had to physically expose yourself. Now you can do it from Russia. So we can't fix it because we can't fix, we can't fix human beings. I don't know how to. If I did, I don't know what it would be what I'd do with that. I do a lot of teaching, right, in university and community college environments. And in higher ed, right, we do okay teaching people concepts, but we don't do a very well job of teaching curiosity, which is really what is important for security and fixing things and finding vulnerabilities. So here is a thought exercise. What is the neatest IoT embedded whatever gadget that somebody in this room owns? Surely somebody has some kind of, smart meter or something. Sir? Alexa. An Alexa. All right. Everybody knows what an Alexa is. Now, can I have a volunteer of somebody who has an idea of how to kill somebody with an Alexa?
If they have a serious medical need in their house and Alexa's in for their electrical grid to turn off their house power?
That's a good point, right? If Alexa is tied into a smart home, right, disrupting people's emergency communications, right? That's a great example, right? We had awkward silence, but all of us in this room are not normal, right? We're dealing with misuses of technology, right? So we have biases. But when I walk into a college classroom and go through this exercise with my students, right, and most of my students are Chinese because of my university, they don't know how to parse the question I'm asking. Right, if you've ever seen like what it looks like for a human mind to blue screen, that's usually the response that I get. It's actually, a couple years ago, I interviewed students for just a student job, wore a nice suit, whatever, and just put on a Burger King crown. Didn't say anything about it. The Asian students could not parse what was happening, right? I just had to take it off because they were just completely lost. But this is not how normal people think of technology. Right? We do, because this is the world we're in, this is the problem we're here to solve. But when people make these technologies, they're thinking, oh, with an Alexa, right, now I can order stuff, and just use my voice. I have an Alexa in my office, because I'll never have it in my home, and all it does is play Pandora. I really don't know what people get out of this device, because we're making technology to do things to solve problems people really don't have to make money. But nobody's, as these technologies are created, saying, hey, what are the consequences of that? What data is being collected? How can that data be accessed and misused? The misuse of data is particularly important to me, right? Informatics is a science of information, right? Specifically, I do machine learning. A couple of weeks ago, I did my PhD qual exam, where I've got my committee there asking me a bunch of questions. And one of the questions was this one, right? Roughly, I don't know if it's an accurate quote, but the essence of the question is, right, in the context of the Hong Kong protests, how would you address adversarial machine learning and facial recognition? So I don't know if people know what those terms are, but adversarial machine learning is basically a subset of machine learning of how you do machine learning safely off of untrusted inputs. It's an academic, gussied up way of saying input validation. But we use just various image transforms to make a 3 be processed as a 4 or whatever. So how do you solve that problem? And in Hong Kong, we have a live world way of doing it. In academic literature, there's never been an attack in the real world until Hong Kong on image recognition systems or facial recognition systems. We've used Gaussian transforms and all this nice, pretty little math. But ultimately, right, if you think about it, we're still solving the same problem that was written about 23 years ago and smashing the stack for fun and profit, which is basically buffer overflows, is how do you do computing safely on untrusted inputs? And we're really not anywhere farther on solving that problem. We have lots of complexities and things we put on top of it. But that's also the problem of web security, right? SQL injection, XSS, all the web vulnerabilities you can think ultimately come down to input validation problems or untrusted inputs. So how bad is facial recognition or image recognition? What number is on the slide? No, it actually is 3. We're not there yet. Soon. Decaf, slow down. There's what's called an MNIST data set, right? Which is just a pretty acronym, which it doesn't really matter what the acronym stands for. It's just handwritten numerals of 0 through 9. And getting a system, a computer, to recognize what number it is. 3, 4, 7, right? The number of classes is fairly simple, right? 0 through 9. Nothing overly complicated. How accurate do you think machine learning is on untrusted inputs to recognize that correctly, percentage-wise? Wow, you're all dark and cynical. It's not that bad for this data set, right? There's this exercise, right, of white box and black box testing of machine learning algorithms, and we get up to 96% off of artificially generated adversarial examples, right? Think about that. 1 in 25 chance that a 3 gets recognized as a 7. And everybody is throwing machine learning and AI into everything. And we can't figure out decimals, just 1 decimal. What could go wrong, right? Oh, I don't know. The biggest use case I can think of image recognition is self-driving cars, right? A car has to figure out what's around it. Well, you've only got a 1 in 25 chance of, hey, that pedestrian's really a crosswalk. Oops, right? We're creating technology that really, the biggest loss isn't information. It's life and safety, where the best we can do is maybe 96%. To go back to our example, right? Image recognition or facial recognition in Hong Kong protests. I'm sure some of you have seen the news. They're using laser pointers pointed at the cameras. People are putting faces. They got this little hologram stuff they put on in front of their face. All sorts of real-world examples to mess with image recognition systems, right? But assuming, that's done in ways that the system can handle, it's a 1 in 25 chance that you throw the wrong person in a concentration camp. That's the stakes of some of the systems that we're creating today, right? And some of those, Facebook is doing image recognition. I don't think Facebook is feeding into what's going on in Hong Kong yet, but that's the world we live in, right? And we're adopting this technology anyway. My entire career in information security has consisted of me saying, hey, you know what? This is a bad idea and you ought not to do that. And people doing it anyway. So, hey, the great news is it's good training for parenthood, right? I'm about to have teenagers who are going to ignore me. So I spend most of my time as a father, and I'm going to say this to my 10-year-old son. When daddy says, what happens when you play stupid games? You win stupid prizes, right? That's about 12 years of fatherhood for me. Well, to be fair, the toddler years, I don't say that too much. They're just toddlers, but you get the point. People are doing things they ought not to be doing. And it's just not how we deal with data that's changing, right? How we're dealing with media and lots of other problems, right? Here's something I just saw yesterday, is that Newsweek, Newsweek was an established and reputable media company back in the day. And this was a reporter saying, you know what, our compensation was tied directly to clicks, which radically skews how we do news. I don't know what the political balance of this room is and what you feel about the media, but the way everything is reported now is basically an influence operation, right? The influence is clicks and whatever to make you outraged or angry, so you keep clicking and keep reading. But we are radically changing all sorts of things downstream because of social media and likes, right? Because now the number of likes you have and the number of retweets you have is a leaderboard that now people are getting compensated on, which radically skews things. But as you know, as people who've done security for a while, anything that is algorithmically generated can and will be algorithmically manipulated. That's life, right? What's SEO or black hat SEO? It's just manipulating search engines, because if you're not on the first page of a Google search, you just don't matter. So there's an entire industry we've created to manipulate algorithms just in search engines. But to go back to my point, right? What would you do in the context of the Hong Kong protests to fix the machine learning and facial recognition? I don't know if it was a response my thesis committee was looking for, but my answer is I wouldn't. I'm not going to create technology that's going to enable people to be thrown in prison because they don't like what their government is doing. Period, full stop. Kick me out of my PhD program if you don't like, right? Now, the benefit is, you clap, right, as if this is a courageous stand. It's really not, right? I don't need the PhD. Kick me out, whatever, right? I'm getting the PhD to troll my university. It's being powered by contempt and rage, right? Yeah, I'm a lecturer. They pay me $12,500. I think we all know the median salary of what we do in this room. $12,500 is like my beer money. It's money I can spend that I don't have to tell my wife about on stuff that I like, right? It affects me, but really, I'm going to eat at the end of the day. But when you start your career, you don't have that luxury, right? But I think our primary duty, right? It's a rhetorical question because you already know what my answer is, right? Is our primary duty to our employers or to the world around us? We are not normal, right? Is that we have skills to help defend against problems that we don't even really know exist yet, or at least the world around us don't know exist yet. And we all make good money, right? Getting into this industry is, a meal ticket to an upper middle class life forever, right? There's more problems than there are people to solve them. We're going to be employed forever. I'm not going to retire. I don't have to retire, right? I can work until I'm 80. Having 6 kids, by the time the 6th kid is out of college, I'm going to retire because I don't want to do crap for nobody after that. But I don't have to retire. I can keep working. There'll always be work. But we have skills that can help the world around us, because if we're just looking at our employers or the web apps that they create, we're really talking about a small sliver of the problem, right? Of just enterprise security, basically. But most of society is not protected by security teams or security tools or the things that we create. There are whole genres of threats that are directly B2C only. As an example of this, I don't know if anybody in the expo room has this swag. It's my favorite piece of swag because it shows how much we suck. How many people have that little slider in front of their webcam? It's more than that. You can all raise your hand. Embrace your shame, people. Right? We're professionals. Our job is to secure stuff. And what do we tell people about creeping on other people's webcams? Put this little slider in front of your webcam. James Comey, at one point the director of the FBI, got on TV and said, well, you know what? I put this little slider in front of my webcam. You're the director of the damn FBI, and we can't protect your webcam. We're nowhere on solving this problem, right? Here's a little piece of plastic to just pretend that the problem doesn't exist. What does this have to do with web apps, right? Machine learning is just a subset of data science. As many of you know, data science is huge. I think data science is huge because we've created web apps, we created mobile apps, which is another form of web apps, that generate tons of information about us. Most of the people who design these systems just want all the information. They don't know what they're going to do with it. They don't know what their use of it is. Just give me all the information, we'll figure it out later. Now we've got this stockpile of data on humanity that would have been impossible to figure out, even at small scale 20 years ago. Let's figure out ways to make money. So we're going to hire data scientists to do data mining. We're going to do machine learning to say, oh, people who tweet about this, we probably ought to give them web advertisements of these products and these services. But there's all sorts of risks with having, that data sitting around, right? We talk about OWASP in terms of on the front end, right, preventing malicious access to that. But on the back end, there's plenty of ways to access the data. What do you think Facebook's going to do when they get a national security letter? They're going to give up the data. As one example, it's a cloud service, not a web app, but I come from a family of lawyers and judges and petty criminals, which is what makes me great in security. I can find a loophole in anything. But there's some voice over IP company that goes to my family's law firm, says, hey, we can do all your voice over IP, your voicemails will be in the cloud, all this stuff. It'll be great, it'll be cheap. They call me and says, what do you think about this? I think this is a profoundly stupid idea. Because at the end of the day, every call that you get as a lawyer is attorney-client privileged. It is the most privilege in the Western world anyway. It's the highest class. It's inviolable except in very narrow circumstances. You just cannot break that. So cloud company, what happens when you get a national security letter wanting to know my uncle's voicemails, who's a lawyer, his communication between his clients? Well, we comply with legal process. Wrong answer, and that is why we're not going to put it in the cloud. But we're adopting these services, and I got an example on the slide here, right? What happens if you email your doctor, your therapist, talking about anxiety and depression, right? That happens. We should take care of our mental health. You're going to have that kind of communication. Well, now all the algorithms, they may not mine your therapist, but they're mining you, and now you get has anxiety disorder label on your Gmail account, even though it's HIPAA protected information. Congratulations, we found a loophole in HIPAA. The data can be stolen. It can categorize us. People have been talking about China's social credit score. If you behave in ways that the Chinese government doesn't like, well, all of a sudden you don't get to ride on trains and fly on planes anymore. Okay, well, that wouldn't ever happen here, except, well, it does because, hey, do you want a 20% discount on your auto insurance? Install this app on your phone that pays attention to where you drive and how fast you drive. And all that information is now available, right? Insurance companies like the social credit score concept because it allows their actuaries to give discounts to good people and not discounts to people that they don't like. But it also allows for some interesting, avenues of trolling. One of my favorite hobbies in the world is harassing politicians. I don't harass any of them, right? In order for this to happen, they have to deserve it in some way, right? They're just bad people. And 8 years ago, had a conversation with a state rep, right? It was redistricting. He promised to move into his new district. His wife didn't want to move, so he didn't. So he decided to transfer his voter registration to a hotel room. I don't know why that made sense to him, because the way they do it in Chicago, I also grew up in the Chicago suburbs from a political family. I know Chicago politics because I lived it for 20 years, right? How they do it in Chicago is you just rent some apartment somewhere. You're getting a $70,000 a year salary. You get a $300 a month flop house. In order to figure out if you're actually there, you got to put a guy on the room watching. Well, this clown with a functional IQ of 40 does a hotel room, which is patent BS to begin with. Then the conversation goes something like this. Representative, did you think about what you did before you did it? What are you talking about? That hotel room, when you got it, does it have a little remote key card? Well, yeah. So you put it to the door to open it up? Yeah. Well, that means instead of having to monitor the door, I just send a legal request to the hotel operator. How many times did your key open that door? Representative, is that number 0? Yeah. Congratulations, there's your first felony. That hotel operator also runs nursing homes that get state funding. Yeah, that means you got a free hotel room from a state vendor? That's your second and third felony. Would you like to go to prison, or would you like door number 2 to just rage quit your office? He chose door number 2. I particularly like to rage quit. That's my favorite. We can't secure information, right? We can try, we can mitigate the risks, right? But even if your web app is secure, right, you can't deal with the malicious insider problem very easily. We haven't found a good way to it. About a month ago, there was a Yahoo employee who was trolling all the images people upload to Yahoo looking for less than clothed pictures of women. He went to prison, but I assure you there's more people at Yahoo that were doing that. He just got caught, right? People with otherwise legal access that are not behaving in inappropriate ways. Let's call them intelligence agencies for short. They get information all the time, right? In China, they're all state-owned companies. They just ask. In the United States, well, we have due process. That due process is send a national security letter and they get the information, right? So we create all of these tools that have risks, right? We may look at the risks on the front end with web vulnerabilities, but what are the implications of that, right? Now, of course, when you start telling your employers no, they tend to not like that, right? I'm sure some of you have run into this. This is a bad idea, right? Or better yet, I'm sure many of you do penetration testing or vulnerability assessment in this room. How many of you do that? Now, how many of you, having done that, have run to a client or your company who said, I'm not going to fix that vulnerability because that would never happen in the real world? I'm pretty sure that's almost every hand that was up for both, right? Now, if you've done this, commercially, right, or internally, right, the most important document you have, right, the tool that says, okay, you can make that choice. I think it's a bad choice. You just sign this risk acceptance document because that means when it all blows up that I'm not the one holding the bag. You accepted the risk. That also comes with consequences, but that's okay. You just can't sit on top of the server room yelling stop, or whatever. There's an old poem that has something about that, yelling on top of the hill, yelling stop. We can't do that. But how do you secure the insecurable, right? Because the reality is, it's all defective duct tape and bubble gum, right? You think, web app security, failure to handle this character breaks all sorts of things, right? The single quote. It's just one character out of 255, right? There's your SQL injection problem. And of course, web security is more complicated than that. But the compromises are relatively simple. And we're just skipping past that you can compromise people trivially. We'll just skip past that problem because I can't fix humanity, right? I can barely fix technology, right? But these simple vulnerabilities also allow us some simple tools from time to time to do bad things to bad people, or at least keep tabs on them, help them get put in prison every now and then. As an example, in 2016, right, the Russians hacked the DNC, the Russians hacked the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. They didn't know what to do with the data they had, so, hey, I got an idea. Let's get on Twitter. And created this account, Guccifer 2.0. The reason that we know the 3 individuals who are associated with that account with the Russian GRU is because one time they were obviously not doing this from the home office. They went to a coffee shop or wherever off-site, and one time the VPN wasn't down. I'm sure many of you have personal VPNs. These things fail silently, and now all of a sudden your IP address is exposed. Oops. This Russian intelligence, you think they know better, but they're using tools that happen to fail quietly. And now we know who they are, and they're under indictment, but it's not like they're ever going to come to the US anyway, right? They made a relatively simple mistake that allowed us to enumerate them. There's lots of interesting other use cases, right? I love Bitcoin, right? One of my hobby projects is tracking neo-Nazi fundraising. The reason I love Bitcoin is because it allows me to follow financial transactions without bribing bankers, right? Intelligence isn't my job title, it is what I do. Because Bitcoin is anonymous, right? You got the alphanumeric strings, this is your wallet, right? But all the transactions are public. Because how do you know that money has changed hands when there isn't a central authority? Well, all the nodes have to see it, and if they have consensus, then the transaction happened. It has to be public by design. Okay, there is so-called perfect use of Bitcoin, but perfect use of Bitcoin is unusable. People want to transact money, which means they've got to let people know who their wallet is, which means anonymity breaks, right? Privacy is not even part of the use case. If you openly ask for donations, then it's obvious who you are. Right? Daily Stormer is not exactly a wholesome individual, right? When I say neo-Nazis, this guy has swastikas on his website, right? This is not, hey, he's conservative. I mean, straight up hates the Jews, all the way down, no ambiguity. His Bitcoin wallet's on his website. All I gotta do is go to an API, and now I say every time that he raises money, he only got $4 since the last transaction, but he's raised, depending on the value of Bitcoin, about $500,000, maybe a little bit more. And by the way, as just a random aside, most of the mass shootings in the United States and the unfortunate one in the Christchurch Mosque in Christchurch in New Zealand are tied to his organization, right? So fairly interesting individual, but he operates openly enough to where I can track his money and he has real wealth. You can also do things like surveil miscreants. Almost everything uses DNS. I don't want to say DNS is life, but as far as the internet is concerned, it is, right? Without DNS, there is no internet, and almost everything uses it. So if attackers want to reach victims or vice versa, they can't really play games with DNS, right? Their host names need to resolve, which means I can go figure out where they're resolving to and track all of their infrastructure, at least their proxies in the first layer of their network, which means I can also put those IP addresses into firewalls. Nobody really thinks about firewalls, right? This device, I got a firewall, I plug it into the network. I allow port 80 and port 443. You can also use that to just block known bad stuff, right? And you don't have to worry about that. We'll come to that point in a little bit. There are some caveats about deception and attackers lie that you can handle. It also, this kind of surveillance has enabled a predatory business model where they register malicious domain names and then see an IP address from a company connect to it, and then they get a call from a sales associate. Hey, you got breached. I got the evidence right here. Here's my invoice to help you clean it up. So we're also enabling bad vendor tactics, but such is humanity. But it's easy to do is the point. Is that often in security, we create the complicated solutions first and skip past the simple ones, which means we're awfully inefficient in what we do, right? Limited amount of time, budget, and people, right? Start with the simple, block as much as you can and go from there, because big enterprises have big budgets. I'm going to guess most of the people in this room are associated with small and medium business. And you're not going to be able to, you'll get Splunk, you might get a security tool, But you're not going to put a bunch of FireEye boxes in and a bunch of Palo Alto this and a bunch of this because you just don't have the budget for it. We create our security tools for enterprises, and we hope that the people in small to medium business do what they can, right? There aren't that many companies out there for that market. So I took that method, right, using this one little line, which is the guts of a bunch of shell scripts, to say, I've got a bunch of malicious domains, about 900,000, whitelisting, clean it up. I'm running this little shell script to just turn those into IP addresses and turn it into a business, right? Not that I'm trying to sell it, but the point is sometimes some of our security problems can be solved greatly, not completely, by simple things, right? Like using parallel and asynchronous DNS queries, right? It's not hard. Somebody just has to do it. And sometimes, like I said, we overcomplicate things. There's a notion of imposter syndrome, right? Which I'm sure some people in this room know, but basically it's a notion of, you know what, I'm not smart enough, I'm not good enough, I can't get on a stage and give a talk. I'm sure many of you have not given a talk at a conference, are perfectly qualified to give a talk. We think of the problems as way too complicated, and sometimes the solution is relatively easy, right? DNS queries are not hard, right? I've solved lots of problems simply by just saying, you know what, I can figure this out simply by just doing advanced counting and math. All of us can do this, but we're pre-wired for whatever reason to think of the problems more complicated than they really are. So start with a simple, and then leave the complex for last, because there's only so much time, so many people, and so many resources, right? Especially if you're a smaller company, right? And you should always start with people. If you have employees that are resistant to clicking on phishing links, you have a lot less to worry about that problem. Going back to the human element, you're never going to solve social engineering, but you can make people a little bit more resistant to it. So let's take the example of business email compromise, right? Not a web vulnerability, primarily. I'm basically social engineering the CEO or CFO or the accountant or whoever to wire money. My boss, I report to a CEO, he gets this about once a month. Well, he doesn't. People in the company get it. They get an email spoofed from him. The email doesn't look like it's anything close to him, but it says his name. Hey, I need you to wire this money. I need you to get back in contact with me ASAP. People are afraid of the CEO, so they do whatever he says instead of picking up a phone. How many people have bought or sold a house? About everybody. How many of you did that transaction exclusively over email? I said, we're not normal. I had this conversation because I bought a new house 2 years ago. The bank's like, yeah, I'd like your tax returns. Can you email them to me? No. You're a bank, and this is a $300,000 transaction, right? There's a genre of business email compromise that are just compromising, low-rent compromises of real estate lawyers and title companies, just doing low-rent tricks. No malware involved. It's all social engineering, and it's a billion-dollar business. And by the way, if your money gets wired someplace else for a down payment on a house, you can't just say, hey, that wasn't me, and it all goes away. Somebody is going to eat that loss. It's not like credit card fraud. There are people that I've worked with who have lost their life savings over this because we can't secure information. Email is insecure and it's insecurable. There is nothing I can give you for email. We have PGP. How many people have installed, or GPG now? How many people have used? A few people. Of the people, keep your hands up, who have GPG installed, how many send just one email a day that's encrypted? Right? Here's the best part. I didn't notice this until I was teaching a CISSP class where somebody sit there and shows screenshots of what GPG looks like, or actually what PGP looked like in the 90s. The interface is still the same. It literally hasn't changed in 20 years. Everything else about technology has changed. Email encryption is, here's this complicated, unusable thing that us normal people in the room, abnormal people in the room, don't want to use because it sucks. Just send your tax returns over email. It's all good. It's not all good. Patching and password security go a long way, but the third data point's the most important. Every time I do an audit of a small to medium business, I ask a question, right? Do you really need to keep that information? Is that really essential that you have health records for 10 years? Can you just shred that? Do you really need to keep that class of information and store it in the first place? Because you can't steal what's not there. People over-collect information and they keep it forever, right? How many people prune their email folders? How many people, or I said the flip side, how many people keep email forever? Almost everybody, right? Nobody goes back and deletes it. Here's a fun anecdote, because I teach digital forensics also. How old does email have to be until I can get it without a warrant? 180 days. Because then it's considered discarded content. Unless it's on my server, right? If you store it on a third-party provider and it's over 180 days, and there's no indication that you're trying to keep it or preserve it, you can get it with just an administrative warrant, which means just signed by some special agent in charge of the FBI, right? You lose all your protection of that, right? So why would you keep data that long, right? For folders, for email servers that I don't have to preserve, I just have things automatically delete after 150 days unless I start it. How many people have gone back to an email 2 years ago or 3 years ago? Occasionally. How often do you do it? Once a month? Once a quarter? Every now and then it happens. Every now and then I'm inconvenienced. Oh, I wish I had that email from 2 years ago. But it's really not that big of a problem, right? Use things you already have. We like layering more product on top of security. Right? Oh, here's another appliance, and another appliance, and another appliance. Hey, that 24-port switch, can you make 22 of them span ports so all these things can inspect traffic? But you have lots of things that can already protect things. And the firewalls are one, right? We'll talk about another in a minute. Start with the simple stuff and stuff that you already have, and then see what's left, right? See what the gaps are. How many people think antivirus is still effective? Raise your hands. One person, right? Two, out of a room of, a couple hundred, give or take, right? How many people would say, don't install antivirus as a security control, just say skip it, don't ever install it? Nobody would do that. Why is this product still a thing? We professionals don't have much love for it, right? Gartner says AV is dead. Why is it still here? Any idea? I ask a room full of cynics this question, and you just reinforce my low faith in humanity. You glorious, glorious people. All of that is true, but it's not the point I'm trying to make. We still have it because it still blocks 70% of nonsense, 80%. I don't know what the percentage is. It's going down, surely. There's ways around it, yes. But it just blocks things, and it just makes it go away, right? Hopefully it's blocking Dark Comet, which is still a thing 12 years later, or whenever it's made. But things are just blocked, and you don't have to worry about it, right? And focusing on things like that. It's simple, it's easy, it's cheap. It blocks some percentage of the threat landscape, all right? Because it's often, like I said, it's not sometimes simple things get you. So, I ran for office in 2012. Right? Actually, I'm starting to run for Congress now, but that's another story altogether. This happened what day is today? I think this happened Tuesday, Monday? I don't know, the days blend together, whatever. It happened recently, right? Ran for office in 2012. At one point I set up a test WordPress site. We're doing a redesign, whatever. Forgot about it. It's not linked anywhere, this test dot whatever, right? The main website was converted to static HTML because I lost the race, so I just downed the website, little static HTML. Thanks, whatever, I suck, I'm going back to work. Cool. Completely forgot about it, right? I just assumed it was unlinked, so it was no longer live. Somebody found it 2-3 days ago, right? A scanner popped it and tried to run an IRC bot on it. Some other defenses that I had on the server caught it, which is how I was like, let's go take a look at that. And it says, oh, somebody's running an IRC bot on my server. That's bad, right? But I'm a professional, right? I shouldn't make these mistakes. Well, it's pretty easy to make these mistakes. For this stuff, I don't have an IT department. It's a test site I forgot about because the main site was already down. But these things happen, right? And it happens an awful lot because of DevOps and cloud deployment. You've got a developer saying, I need to make something, so I'm going to spin up a bunch of stuff in AWS with test data. We don't know how to generate test data, so we use live data. Maybe it's, well, we'll just swap first names and last names of people, but all the other data is still there, so it's test data, it's not valid. And here we are, right? And I forget which bank it was where they found some tens of millions of credit card applications on an unsecured S3 bucket. You could say, oh, you're a big bank, you shouldn't have unsecured S3 buckets. Well, when you give your developers access to AWS and there's no control around it, you really can't stop that problem, right? Oh, but there's data loss prevention. Okay. How many people actually believe in DLP, that DLP works? You're professionals, a couple of people? You have way too much hope, sir. Give me time, I will break you.
It's not that it can't be broken, but it can help.
Yeah, it's a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. I guess it makes you feel better. No, not really. Does brown liquor help you feel better? Does brown liquor help you feel better? Let me play you the song of my people. So, as an anecdote of simple things that could work, right? How does DNS work? All of you are familiar with DNS, right? You've got your root servers, you've got your top-level domains, you've got the authoritative name servers, and you've got your resolver that's mitigating all of that and trying to figure out how do I get to www.google.com, because computers don't understand names, they only understand ones and zeros. Well, if you control the resolver, you control everything, right? And everybody has a resolver. How many of your workplaces how many of you work in workplaces that do not have your own DNS resolver? Right, essentially nobody, unless you work in a company of 5 people and then you use your ISP's resolver, and you shouldn't do that because your ISP probably wants your data. And you might be tempted to go to Quad 8s, but you shouldn't because Google wants your data. But you can block lots of stuff in DNS, right? There's response policy zones. It's built into DNS. You don't have to install anything, it's already there. All you have to do is tell it what to block, right? So instead of going to badsite.com, they get something else. Either it doesn't resolve, it goes to a security awareness page, whatever you want, because everything that's bad on the internet often starts with DNS. How do you secure these IoT devices? Does anyone work in a medical environment here? Nobody. All right, that's fair, right? There are tons of devices we're putting on networks that we cannot modify. Regulatorily speaking, you cannot modify an MRI machine. That includes putting AV on it, endpoint, CrowdStrike, whatever you want to put, you can't do it. When a patch comes out, that's all sorts of problems with the FDA and recertification, right? We've got devices that we can't modify. IoT devices, it's basically a computer without an interface. Full built-out operating system, you can do anything you want on an IoT teddy bear, because what humanity really needs is a teddy bear connected to the internet. But it's there, it's communicating, and it has full operating system, and you can't protect it. But that teddy bear uses DNS, which provides you something, right? You can detect on host names, IP addresses, the authoritative name server host name and IP address, right? You could turn it next domain. You could log the query and let it happen. Many of you work in large organizations that are allergic to blocking things because, there could be a false positive. Okay, well then you could log it, and at least the SOC knows somebody queried something bad and do a response to it. You can move things to a walled garden that says, hey, you clicked on a link in email. That was phishing, and this is why you shouldn't do that. The reason that is important is that everything we know about security awareness training and the indicators that we give people of the padlocks and the warning messages of this site's not secure, the academic literature says all of that crap doesn't work. Effectiveness near zero. The only thing that does work is real-time feedback. That they did something and immediately they got feedback, you shouldn't have done this, and that's why. You can do that in DNS, right? In fact, there's a couple of companies that exist. Their entire business model is to send phishing attacks to their clients, and when people click on links, they get awareness training. This was your security vendor, Phish Labs or whoever. We tried to phish you and we succeeded. This is what you should look for, don't do that again. That is very effective. Not very effective, More than zero. Statistically significant effectiveness, right? You can do similar with firewalls. You've got these devices in your environment. How many of you work for companies that don't have a firewall? Everybody's got a firewall. And these things have access control lists. Let's say you're a financial institution, right? There's an OFAC list of sanctioned countries thou shalt not do business with. They have entire net blocks you can go put in your firewalls. Go block Eastern Europe, right? Not that geographic blocking is great, but banking fraud is pretty heavily correlated to Eastern Europe. If you block that space, you block an awful lot. You can also do this for web apps. Usually, and going back to the campaign website, the IP address that initially found the vulnerability and put the little PHP script on the server was a different IP than was actually uploading the IRC bot and whatever. The automated tools the adversary uses, and most of the exploitation of web apps start with automated scanning, come from infrastructure that's well known, right? They scan everything, they hit honeypots, right? There's companies that will sell you honeypot data, great, woohoo. Tell you what, set up your own honeypots, you get all sorts of intelligence, you can block those IP addresses, because nothing should ever talk to a honeypot. That's not terribly exciting. But if they don't know you're vulnerable in the first place, then they don't come back. It's not 100%, right? 80%, whatever. It goes away because the automated tools won't catch you so that people won't come back to do the interactive stuff. Now, if you're specifically targeted, they're going to go to your website and figure it out. But the scale of the vulnerable space of society is too large even for the attackers, right? They have just as much of a scale problem as we do, right? So we can use that to our advantage, right? It's not 100%. Nothing's 100%. Got an unlimited budget? I could probably get you to 5 nines, right? Anybody who says they offer you 100% security is full of crap. Don't buy their stuff because they're probably just running a Perl one-liner and and selling you snake oil, but you know that. But if you can get 90% for cheap, right? That's why AV is relevant. You spend $50 a year, it blocks stuff. It blocks stupid stuff that you don't have to deal with because your users every now and then are going to click on stupid stuff, right? You're going to find minor mistakes. Everybody in here has probably developed a web app and there was a stupid mistake that got missed. And so hopefully your automated scanner found it, or your red team found it, or maybe the attacker found it. This is all too complicated and way too easy to make a mistake. But if you can at least limit the threat landscape by 90%, hey, that's something. And that might be the one that saves you. How many people have heard that in 2016, election authorities got compromised? Right? I live in the state where that happened, state of Illinois. We had an online voter registration system, right? So people could say, oh, I want to register to vote. Normally you can do that for the DMV or whatever. They created an online system because, I don't know, it made sense. Now we have universal voter registration, so it's all kind of deprecated, but online website, right? They found a SQL injection vulnerability because something was scanning the entire internet and found it. The way the Illinois State Board of Elections noticed that they had a problem is that their web servers were being knocked down under high load, and they took a look and found that somebody was basically brute forcing the tables to find information. It was not nearly as targeted as an attack as people think. I actually disagree with the FBI. I think it was a conventional cyber criminal that was doing it, not Russian intelligence. That person may have been flipping information to Russian intelligence because, they do like their tribute every now and then. Either you got to cut them in on your profits, or you cut them in on information and you get your 6 months harassment-free card, right? But that would have been prevented just by the 7 IP addresses they publish. 6 we knew about were just scan the internet machines for years. If those would have been blocked, that compromise never would have happened. So you can focus your spend on things that matter, where your gaps really are, or the security vacation club, right? You go to conferences, DEF CON, Black Hat. Don't go to Black Hat. Don't go to RSA. I guess Derby is not a thing anymore. Go to Shmoo. Shmoo in DC is good, right? And less products. But I mentioned earlier, right? What about the unprotected? The amount of the internet landscape that's actually in an enterprise environment is relatively small. Most of the internet is just people. At this point, most internet traffic is mobile devices, often on 4G, right? Which means there's no protection whatsoever. It's just the endpoint in the wild, wild west. There is no AV for iPhones, right? Here's what you have, right? We work for companies, we have budget, we have training, we have tools. The unprotected doesn't. They don't have tools, training, they're just folk, right? And like I said, a majority of mobile devices are out there. And if I compromise an employee at home, well, I've compromised the organization. How many of you heard of the Shadow Brokers release, right? Lots of data stolen from the CIA, right? And there's a different one from the NSA and all sorts of interesting leaks that have happened in the past couple of years, which should lead to the question in your minds is, how is it that one of the most well-funded intelligence agencies in the world can't keep a damn secret anymore? But that happened because somebody brought hacking tools home because they were a contractor, wanted to get ahead. I'm sure many of you have brought your work home too. He turned off his AV because he wanted to, for whatever reason, get a cracked version of Microsoft Office. Because I imagine what his salary was. I don't know why $100 would make or break him, but he installed a cracked version of Office. And he had to turn off his AV because AV was deleting his cracked version of Office. Could have put in a directory exception, whatever, didn't do that. Realized he got all the malware because he didn't have AV anymore. So, bought Kaspersky. Kaspersky's good antivirus. Kind of by a Russian company. But it's good AV, it's solid tech. Kaspersky found all the malware, and coincidentally, the hacking tools that he was working on because, well, guess what? Those are hacking tools. That AV should detect that. And all these things, ship it all back. Congratulations. The Russians now have the CIA and NSA's tools, which created a great geopolitical shit show between the United States and Russia over Kaspersky and leaking these tools. All sorts of fun. But the matter is, even intelligence agencies, you had a contractor bring stuff he really shouldn't have brought home because it was highly classified, but did anyway and got compromised at home because it was outside of the enclave. Right? If I can compromise intelligence agencies, the most well-funded intelligence agency in the world, over this problem, right? This is where the problem really needs to be solved. You're not normal, right? All the other normal people, they don't know how to protect themselves, right? What normal people do is, I don't know if anybody has a VCR anymore, but I'm sure you have friends or family who couldn't figure out how to set the time on a VCR or a DVD player, because it's still blinking 12 o'clock. Right? We've got to solve the problem for them because we may be able to solve the problem in terms of the front end of our web interfaces. But our duty to broader society is help protect the ones around us, right? We have all sorts of physical threats that are being emerged. 10 years ago, the information security threat was information. You'd lose credit cards, you'd lose state secrets, you'd lose whatever. Now we're inventing actual physical crimes or things that with a physical nexus, right? Romance scams, cyberbullying, all this stuff, which leads to body counts. I don't know how many people have killed themselves over cyberbullying, but that number is not zero, right? And that is enabled by technology that we are in part helping to create. If I steal user credentials for an online bank and transfer money, are we going to make the victim eat that loss? In some cases we do, in business email compromise and real estate fraud. So with great leetness comes great responsibility. We have all sorts of ability, right? We are trained professionals. If we're not really protecting our employers, one, but society generally, until we start doing something about those unprotected. There are resources for that. There's Stop, Think, Connect. You can have a session to protect consumers, go meet with your chamber of commerce or a church group or a PTA or whatever and say, hey, you're having a problem with this. Here's something you can do for cheap or free, because we have that knowledge and there's nobody out there doing it. We could say, why isn't the government doing X? Or one example, why isn't the FBI prosecuting more cyber criminals? Because we would have to grow the FBI to an insane proportion to deal with the amount of crime. One. And that's skipping past how hard it is to get international cooperation in law enforcement, because crime can travel across borders, and law enforcement jurisdiction doesn't, right? You could look at the Global Cyber Alliance. They have a toolkit to protect elections and SMBs. How many of you are concerned about election security? Everybody is. But the problem landscape for them is much the same as what you deal in your own organizations. The Illinois State Board of Elections had a SQL vulnerability. I'm less worried about the state election authorities because elections are governed and the votes are counted locally. I have counties in my state that have sub 10,000 population. They're never going to have resources to stand up to the Russians or the Iranians or the Chinese or anybody else that was inspired to muck around in our elections since 2016. It means the only thing that they can do is rely on somebody like me driving down to help them and say, hey, let's go look at your website. Let's go run a quick pen test. Let's go put you behind Cloudflare so at least you have, in effect, some kind of a WAF. At home, that's how I protect myself, right? You help people to do it at home. I've got 2 Raspberry Pis, one running a Pi-hole, one running ThreatStop, which, that would cost money for normal people, but just give people Pi-holes and just start blocking things in DNS, which, oh, by the way, starts blocking things from kids who like visiting games and places on the internet they ought not to because kids click everything, right? It's 2 Raspberry Pis. It's about $100, $120. And I could block millions of domain names with it, right? It works. It's relatively simple. I had to tweak it a little bit, but by and large, I travel a lot. If there's any problem with the internet, I'll hear about it, and I've got to fix it for whatever. So yeah, I could create a whitelist in GitHub. The reality is, I get to have fun with my kids every now and then. Yes, Gabe, I do know what websites you're going to. Not sorry at all. InfoSec will never be solved. We can't, it is, I don't want to say it's an unsolvable problem, but we can't solve humanity, right? I can't sanctify mankind. I'm not sure mankind would like it if it were my brand of sanctification. We are making society less secure by adopting technology that we ought not to adopt, but we can't say no. We overcomplicate protection. Start simple, go from there. But also, we've got to work and protect the unprotected. Right? Spend some measure of time, sometimes pro bono, protecting things around us that matter. We all have skill sets that could solve some problem somebody in society is having, right? So I said, we make a good salary, providing for our families is all fine and good. We need to expand the sphere of beneficence, and obviously the actual risks are no longer just information, right? They're physical and real world risks. Any questions? I know it's not 10 a.m. quite yet, but you don't have to let me off easy. It is? I am bang on. Best speaker ever.